Welcome back to Everyday Therapy. This is the official podcast of Nystrom & Associates. We have over 50 clinic locations across 5 states. I'm Krista Overson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm joined by Brett Cushing, also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And we believe that therapy can be life-changing, and we want to make it approachable. So we are very excited to be here to talk with you today, part 2, about anger.
Yes, more about anger.
More about anger.
And which is kind of ironic because I think we don't like anger. We don't want more about anger. We want less about anger. I think, we talked about that last time too, that we tend to avoid anger and think it's bad. And I think one of the things we took away from last time was that so much of anger we think is external, but it's really primarily internal. Yeah, it's what's going on inside.
Exactly. It's an internal, to kind of summarize last time was it's information coming from inside internally, telling you, it's like a signal for you to let you know something's amiss, possibly that you're feeling powerless about something, that someone's crossing one of your boundaries, or that there's some need not being met. Those are just 3 of the possible meanings of anger. So going inward is typically one of the ways to handle that. So we wanted to get a little more practical today.
Yes.
About what to do and kind of what if you sense anger in yourself.
Right. Yeah. So as we go inward, maybe we can think about identifying our anger.
Great.
And there's different types of anger, and maybe we can highlight those types of anger for people who are listening to kind of get a sense of what's my type of anger that I might be, living in. So
sure.
I know you and I were talking just a little bit ago about, I think 5 types: chronic anger, passive-aggressive anger, self-inflicted anger, explosive anger, and righteous anger. Do you want to talk a little bit about chronic anger? That seems like our culture seems to be in chronic anger a lot right now, because it just seems people have a very short fuse, a lot of easily feeling offended. What is chronic anger?
Great question. So this is a long-lasting state of anger that is kind of with you over time. So it's characterized by a general sense of irritability and resentment. So this is, I think all of us can think of someone. You've heard people talk about, oh yeah, so-and-so's got anger issues, or like, or you can maybe picture someone who just kind of their energy when you interact with them, they just kind of have this underlying irritability or like not that they're about to explode. It's not even that. It's just more like they're just kind of like, I don't know if we could say grumpy.
Yeah, like kind of a low boil.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not bubbling over, but you can tell.
Right. It's almost the default setting. It's not just I'm in a bad mood today. It's like it's bubbling over time. I think this is a lot of times what in Alcoholics Anonymous or the 12-step programs they talk about. Alcoholics, when they stop drinking, up comes all of the restless, irritable, and discontent.
Right.
Because they haven't addressed the mind. They haven't addressed the thought processes that they usually are operating under. And a lot of it's resentment. Why aren't things the way I want them to be? Why doesn't so-and-so do this way? I mean, so it's it's a thought process that shows up as low grade, irritable all the time.
Yeah. And I don't know. Do you think those people who have chronic anger, do you think they see it? Because I know everybody else in the world sees it. But they don't.
I think that is such a good question. I think it really depends. I think in my experience, it does take some sort of like event or, they say with alcoholics, like you have to hit rock bottom. I think some are aware of it, but they're usually working to change it at that point. And I think otherwise, I do think it's hard to see. For the person to see it in themselves.
What do you think causes this then? If people are having chronic anger, you mentioned, they're not getting their drug, they're not getting that chemical fix of alcohol.
Right.
Obviously, this doesn't apply just to chemical abuse. Yep. So what else might cause chronic anger?
That's a great question. I think it's probably this might be dramatic, but a lifetime of seeing the world in a certain way, which again, we can kind of inherit from our family of origin. our parents
Right.
can model certain things to us, the way they talk about life, the way we see them cope or not cope with life. It can kind of be this thought process of like, things are unfair. I never get mine. I always have to, right? Kind of some of those all or nothing thinking,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, I think of police officers.
Okay.
Because I work with a lot of cops, and you might have a bad day at the office 1 or 2 days a week. For them, they can have a bad day at the office every day because they're constantly seeing the unfairness of life, how inhumanely we treat one another
Yep.
regularly. They see pain and misery and suffering and trauma. And you can see it on some cops. It will absolutely have an effect. The other people I think back in high school, teachers.
Okay.
Who I've seen you just kind of knew, they've been teachers for 2 decades.
Yes.
And they're like a little jaded, these kids, they're just getting worse, or they're not appreciative or whatever.
Yep.
But that speaks to that unrelenting kind of disappointment and draining effect of life.
When I was when you said that about teachers, when I was in school, those were the teachers I was afraid of. Like, I remember in 3rd grade, my teacher had that, I could sense it at that age. That was her setting. She was annoyed. I mean, it was like she had sort of a short fuse. She didn't like yell at us or anything, but like, it was just like this chronic low. It was communicated.
Right.
And kids can pick up on it too. So yeah. So it can be pervasive.
Yes.
So that's chronic anger.
All right. So passive aggressive is the next one. Tell us about that.
Okay. This one I love because I was just talking with someone who recently moved from California, and she's adjusting to life in the Midwest.
Oh.
And was asking me about passive aggressive just communication. So anyway, I think this can be sort of cultural, but passive aggressive anger includes indirect expression of anger. So you might use sarcasm, you might use like subtle insults or withholding behaviors to express that you're unhappy with something.
Withholding behaviors. That sounds really interesting.
I know. Okay, so classic example I just heard about, or this just popped into my head because I heard it yesterday. So you're trying to make plans with a friend, and your friend tells you, "Hey, I can't get together at the time that we had decided," and it kind of makes you mad because you're like, this friend always does this to me, blah blah blah. And so the friend says, "Okay, well, does that still work for you if we meet later?" Blah blah blah, and you just don't reply to the text, right? Like, that's to me a withholding behavior where you're just like, instead of saying like, "Hey, I'm disappointed," but like, you just kind of go silent. To me, that's passive aggressive.
Yeah, and I think it comes from people where anger is bad.
Yes.
And so I have it and I want to express it in an aggressive manner, but that's bad.
Right.
So this seems better and I'm going to get what I want.
Yes.
And so it is classic, I think. I had a guy work for me. He was literally twice my age. And I would always ask him to do things. And then it moved to telling him to do things. And it was always problematic because he'd say, "Oh, yeah, sure, I'll do it." Never did it.
Oh, my gosh, that's a great example. The withholding of like, I'm not going to do this thing.
Right.
Even though I'm telling you, I'll do it.
So it was an aggressive no, but the expression of that was very passive in person.
Exactly. And then sarcasm, I mean, we all kind of know sarcasm, but have you ever, I've met people or I've interacted with people where it's like the sarcasm is just thick, right? It's like there's different grades of sarcasm.
Sure.
There can be like, just I never
really
would have guessed.
Good humor.
Yeah. Like, sarcasm. Oh, you're kidding. I never would have thought, right?
Yes.
And about something really obvious, right? But then there's like, gosh, I'm trying to think of a good one. Like, I can't think of one right now, but where it's like, it's very pointed and it's like sharp, right?
Yeah. And it's frequent. Yes, it's very frequent when it's passive aggressive. And I think when we're the recipient of passive aggressive anger, it's almost like a drive-by. It happens and you're like, what? Wait, what? What just happened? Did this person, they just insulted me.
Yeah,
or you don't catch it until the person's already passed by. And that's that passive expression.
Yep.
But then you're left with, oh, this is really unsettling.
Right. And I think this one is a tricky one to pick up on sometimes, because in some families, it's like, I've heard people say like, we're fluent in sarcasm in this family, you know, or sarcasm is our love language, or, you know, and it's like, it can be hard to even realize that this is passive aggressive anger because it's so like acceptable and accepted.
And I know with Gottman, we talked about Gottman and marriage and couples with partners, and there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And one of them is the most detrimental horseman of the apocalypse, if you will, of the ending of a relationship is resentment. And he says that the number one form of resentment and resentment getting expressed is sarcasm.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's when it's kind of doomsday. It's eventually this is going to come undone. And so I think it is wise for us to really look at sarcasm when it's happening within ourselves, within other people, and ask, what's really, was this funny? Was this trying to make a connection, or is there some real anger here?
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
All right, so self-inflicted, that sounds very interesting.
I know, it kind of sounds intense. I mean, they all do, but so this is kind of that anger turned inwards. So this is where your anger is directed at yourself. Like it might be self-blame, guilt, or feelings of inadequacy. So this one I think is maybe harder for others to detect, and even maybe yourself, because you might not realize how you're treating yourself, right? You might be so used to putting yourself down, or
that's normal.
or being so frustrated with yourself that you might not even realize what you're doing. But this is like where you're frustrated with yourself. You know, it's like, it's almost the self-talk would sound like, why can't I ever? Why do I always? You know, I should be able to. Lots of shoulds in there, right? And I think this is where you might even see depression as a result.
I think you make a really good point, a number of really good points. One, depression, because I've heard the adage, this is kind of an old adage, that anger turned inward is depression. That is what depression is. The other point I think you made, I can't remember, but I wanted to piggyback on it with this, that
shoulds?
Not the shoulds.
Okay.
I should have commented on that, but I think, the point you made is that it's hard for us to see it.
Yes.
Hard to see that this is self-inflicted anger, because I think self-inflicted anger we think is me just being responsible. And so, for instance, you will know that if you're kind of engaged in self-inflicting anger, if you can't receive any validation, if you can't give yourself any self-validation, it's just that refusal is probably a good sign that, I might be having a lot of self-inflicted anger.
Exactly. Yep. So the next one, explosive anger.
Yes, I think we all kind of know what that one is.
I know it's pretty self-explanatory, but this would be where you do see maybe sudden outbursts of anger, more aggressive behavior, yelling, maybe even physical violence. So that's this, again, you could very easy to observe from the outside.
Yes.
Someone who has you might say like so-and-so has a short fuse, right? Or so-and-so has a quick temper.
Right.
And I've witnessed this sometimes where I've known people who have both the chronic and explosive.
Right.
So you might not always see those two go together, but sometimes they do.
Well, I think of self-inflicted as well, because self-inflicted is that suppression of the emotion. And explosive is the other end of that, where we can't keep it down, press down, and boom, it's like a volcano. It just erupts.
Exactly.
And I think we got to be careful with this too, because I think a lot of times we think of explosive anger as bad. And that's always bad. And yet, I'll just say this, that being a guy who likes action movies, grew up in action movies, I think that sometimes we applaud explosive anger. When you have somebody who's been wronged in a movie, and that's the protagonist is going to go and get their revenge and take on, all these people and just start wiping everybody out. And we all kind of applaud, isn't that great?
Right.
And really, in some cases, it's really explosive anger And we all kind of watch and say, yeah, that's justified. And yet, explosive anger, is it ever really justified? I don't know if we should answer that. I'm going to let people judge that on their own.
No,
but I want to throw out the question for people to ponder.
I think that's a great point because, yeah, like you're saying, we talk about it. We're like, oh, there's healthier ways to express anger. But like we see these portrayals in movies and TV, right, of explosive anger. And
right.
It's like, we're like, ooh, you know. That's,
and that's why we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We go to watch the good guy beat up on all the bad people or the good gal beat up and respond.
Well, and maybe that's why we like them. Because we can't do that.
Yes, exactly.
Right? It's like so satisfying to watch someone else be able to have an anger or, vengeful response, right?
Yes. And some of the research does indicate that doesn't abate the anger. It doesn't get rid of anger. We think it's a good outlet for us.
Yes.
Go punch a punching bag or something. And I think there's something to be said about expending the energy with that.
Yeah.
But there's some research that does indicate it's not that effective.
Sure.
It can actually ramp us up more.
Yes.
So that takes us to the last one. This one I'm
excited
eager to talk about.
Right?
This.
I know.
Yeah, righteous
anger.
Yes.
So I think we are seeing a lot of righteous anger today. So it's in response to perceived injustices or violations of personal values, often associated with a desire for social change or standing up for yourself or others. So, I mean, it's an election year. There's a lot going on. I think righteous anger is at the forefront right now.
Right.
For a lot of people.
Oh, what a great point.
Based on political values and, the news, I think.
Right. And I think inherent within that, and I'm glad we're talking about righteous anger, because usually I hear people refer to their anger as, well, this is righteous indignation.
Yes,
this is righteous anger.
If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Right?
Yeah.
I saw that bumper sticker.
And I think that's a good one. When you talk about the political season we're in too, there's this mantra I hear all the time that people will say, well, this candidate makes me so angry.
Yeah.
Or these people of this political party make me so angry. And there's almost this righteous sense, this perceived, I should say, sense that, hey, I'm righteous in my anger because you made me angry. So can we just kind of stop on that for a moment to dispel that myth?
I love it.
That things and people make us angry.
Yes.
So when I say, Krista, you make me angry, that is, if you think about it, kind of a nonsensical statement.
Totally.
Because it's my anger, so it's my emotion.
Yep.
And where does that come from? Where do our emotions come from? They always come from our thoughts
and
our
beliefs.
Perceptions, our beliefs.
Exactly.
And so when I say you make me angry, I'm saying I have no accountability in this. I have no responsibility.
There's nothing in me that needs to be examined.
Right. Yeah, I'm fine, and my beliefs, my perceptions are either completely irrelevant or they're righteous. But really we're bypassing that.
Right.
And I'm saying you are accountable for how I feel.
Exactly.
Namely angry.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
I love this. Because when you were saying, Krista, you make me angry, I was like, that could also be translated, like the reality of it is, Krista, you're doing or saying something that I don't like, is basically what you're saying there. Now, we all turn it into this or that, or this person or that person makes me angry. Yes. But what we're actually saying is, I don't like or want that person or situation to be what it is.
Right. And politics right now is a really good example of that.
Right. So because, again, if we're saying something created anger in us, that really we're reacting to something out there based on our own lens and perception, and we don't like it.
And I don't like it.
I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't agree with it. But again, it still comes back to me. Why? I'm the one who has my beliefs. I'm the one who has my lenses that I'm looking at the world through.
Right.
So it's really about...
And because it's yours, then anything that's yours, you are responsible for.
Exactly.
But if I say, you made me angry. Now I have no accountability. I have no responsibility. You have all the responsibility.
Yes.
And this is one of the things that I think has makes our culture in a very vulnerable and dangerous place when we continually live out this dangerous myth that you made me angry.
Yep.
You are responsible for how I feel.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's very toxic. And now that I think about it a little bit more, that's kind of the same dynamic that's occurring in domestic violence relationships where you have the batterer who takes no responsibility for him or herself and places all the blame for everything virtually on their intimate partner.
Right.
And so it's the same dynamic. I don't think it's a big stretch to say that's what happens in our culture. We're not taking responsibility for our anger and just absolutely blaming it on somebody else.
Exactly. Good point. I think the other thing I was going to say about that was practical tip here.
Yeah.
If you find yourself experiencing any kind of anger, but particularly righteous anger, just ask yourself why.
Yes.
Just kind of stop and say, okay, so Brett and Krista are saying, if I'm angry at so-and-so, it's really ultimately comes back to me. Mm-hmm. Why would this or that situation, scenario, person make me feel angry?
Yes.
Just ask yourself why. You don't have to have the answer. But again, it's this like helping yourself reflect. We're always trying to get clients in therapy to reflect on their own patterns, right?
Yes.
Why? Why would this make me angry? Mm-hmm. Right?
What's going on?
What's going on with me? Right. I think we all could stand to do that a little more.
I can see what's going on with you.
Right.
That you're a supporter of this person or that. Now, I can see that, but I'm not willing to really look at what's going on with me. How am I perceiving you? What are my beliefs about you?
Right.
You know, and sometimes if we really were to pause and look at what is going on inside of me, and if we could just sort of see that typed up and put on a screen and say, oh, this person did this. They made me angry. Oh, wait, no, what's going on? Mm-hmm. I'm believing this person is of no value. Mm-hmm. I'm believing this person is evil. Mm-hmm. I'm believing, and then the list goes on and on. And those beliefs, if we really look at how all or nothing they are and how we are absolutely ready to dispose of somebody, those beliefs that actually are what fuel our anger is probably worse than the action of the other person.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm glad we took a little pause on that. And
me too.
I mean, we all do it. I do it. I'm sure you do it. We all do it. So,
well, and I think anger, ultimately, dealing with your anger is all about taking your power back. Because anger is giving away your power to say this or that situation out there is upsetting me to the point where I no longer have control. And I just it's like, I'm just mad now. Right. And taking your power back is basically like, okay, I may not like what's going on. I may not agree with what's going on. I might be displeased with the situation, but I have some power here. I can do something for myself. I don't have to just sit with this and just be mad, right? You can be mad. There's nothing inherently wrong with being mad, but it's like you're feeling powerless. So how can you take your power back?
And I think that goes back to that explosive anger because we try to take our power back by being angry because and we all know this, you're at some place, you're in line at McDonald's and somebody gets really angry at customer service and you can feel the whole lobby everybody's tense. Everybody's like, oh man, and why? Because anger has this unsettling and destabilizing effect on people. I shouldn't say that. It's not that anger does that, but the destructive, explosive expression of it causes people to have a sense of anxiety and apprehension. So trying to get our power back, we'll use this explosive anger to kind of keep other people off, and then they're not in control. But that's what's so dangerous about this is it feels so good to be angry because I feel like I'm in control. And the irony is I'm really not. That emotion is so out of control that it's so deceptive. It feels like I'm in control and it feels good, especially in that moment.
Yep.
And then it's not. And
Exactly.
I realize the emotion is in the driver's seat and I'm like in the back seat or the trunk. Or
exactly.
tied to the hood. But
Yeah.
that's so deceptive about anger. It does feel like I'm in control, and when it's explosive anger, it feels like I'm in control, but really not.
Yep, exactly.
So a couple of words on this, and then we'll kind of finish up and we'll kind of preview our next one on anger. But we talked about these different types, and another thing for us to think about, I think, is that anger is a secondary emotion. Not all the time. Some people argue it's a primary emotion.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of truth in that, but there are times when it's secondary.
Sure.
So we want to look at our anger and ask ourselves, what's really behind that?
Sure.
What's behind the anger? And I think for a lot of people, we already talked about one with that self-inflicted.
Yep.
What's really kind of behind that sometimes as a result of it is depression, but it's also sadness.
Yep.
And it's a sense of powerlessness too.
Right. Exactly.
And I also think it's fear.
Sure.
I think of those dogs that are kind of lashing out at people sometimes, and we see like, wow, that is a ferocious dog, explosive anger.
Yep.
And in reality, sometimes they're just afraid.
Sure.
And that's no different than us as people. A lot of times we're really afraid, but that feels so vulnerable and I have no control.
Yes.
And that deceptive part of anger, when it's explosive, is really kind of dangerous, and it's masking either the fear or the sadness or the powerlessness that's really going on. And I'd rather feel like I'm in control rather than embrace the reality that I'm not. Yes.
Totally. I'm so glad you brought that up about secondary emotions, because even as a therapist, sometimes I'm like, wait, what's a secondary emotion?
Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I think there's still a chance to kind of look at that, because I was kind of like, okay, what's a primary emotion? What's a secondary? So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a secondary emotion is when you have an emotion about your emotion.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So
or you have an emotion about your emotion, or it's
a response to your emotion, kind of.
Like I'm really sad.
Okay.
And I'm going to be angry instead. So that comes out. The primary thing is I'm sad. I'm powerless.
Sure.
But I'm not going to live there. I'm going to be angry instead.
Okay. Or like if you get angry and then you feel guilty about getting angry.
Yeah.
So you turn your anger inward, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so anger, I think this is a good, just again, reminder and tip for people, and myself included. If there's anger going on, ask yourself, what is this really about? So again, to the why, right?
Yeah.
Is this about control? Is this about, I'm afraid?
Yes.
I think a lot of times people get angry when they feel afraid underneath, because anger is easier and it actually motivates us more than fear, right? I think, I had one other point I was going to make about it. I know I get angry about being angry sometimes. I don't like feeling angry. I'll just share that with you all.
Yeah.
And I don't know many people that love feeling angry, but sometimes I feel like I'm shoulding on myself. I should be able to see things in such a way that I don't need to get angry. So if I get angry, it feels...
I can relate to that.
Can't you?
Yeah.
If I get angry, I feel like I'm failing somehow. Like I let something get to me if I'm angry. So and then I get angry that I'm angry.
And then it just intensifies.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm like, I shouldn't be mad about this.
Right. Yeah, we go and we get all critical rather than like what you were saying earlier, just curious.
Right.
What's going on?
Yep, exactly. So hopefully this has been a helpful overview, again, of anger, kind of digging in more to it. And I think we're going to do another one with just kind of some more practical advice for you on how to manage the emotion of anger.
What do we do with it?
What do we do with it?
See you next time.
Stay tuned.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.